Orson Welles behind the camera. A camera focused for this program on a fairly out-of-the-way and little-known corner of Europe, the land of the Basques. We placed this camera directly on an international border. Over on that side is the ancient kingdom of Navarre, and there, where the low Pyrenees start ambling down to the sea, is France. It's still pretty heavily guarded up here, and for quite a time after the war in Spain, this border was closed, tight, a sort of miniature iron curtain. At least that was the theory. But in war or peace, old times are new to the people who actually live up here. This border has always been more of a theory than a fact. A theory of the French and Spanish governments, whose vigilant customs officers patrol it. No, the people who live here are neither French nor Spanish. They're Basques. And the rise and fall of other republics, other kingdoms, has never made them forget it, that they're Basques. And that Basques are what Basques are. Well, what is a Basque? All we know for sure is what a Basque is not. Besides not being French or Spanish, a Basque is not Mediterranean, Alpine, Magyar, Celtic, Germanic, Semitic, nor Scandinavian. He isn't even Aryan. Nobody knows who his ancestors were. According to him, Adam and Eve were pure Basque. And it's true that his position is something like the Red Indians in America. He's an aboriginal. He's in Europe before the other Europeans came along. To this day, he speaks his own weird language, a tongue no expert has ever been able to trace. Over there, in General Franco's half of the Basque country, this language is quite literally against the law. It's treason to speak it in Spain, so of course, since Basques will be Basques, their language is spoken just a little bit more on the Spanish side. What we're hearing now isn't part of some Basque conversation. It isn't a war whoop. It's a sort of call, a signal sung from France to Spain. It has to do with pigeons. There they are. Believe it or not, those pigeons are flying directly over the regular smuggling route. They do it every year. Every day, more than 1,000 people smuggle something or other across this border. I don't know how many pigeons there are up there, but I can assure you that smuggling is the biggest industry in these parts, except during the pigeon season. These are German and English pigeons, very orderly and methodical pigeons, and they turn up annually at this border, just at this time, just here, where the Basques on both sides, working in perfectly illegal and harmonious cooperation, catch them. Catch is the right word, too, because here pigeons aren't shot at. The rifle fire is only a sound effect, produced by that long strip of cloth on the pole. This saves ammunition and persuades the impressionable German pigeon that he is being shot at. Those wooden discs, suggesting at the same time that he's being chivied by hawks. But in fact, he and the rest of his flock are only being rounded up and corralled. A maneuver of the highest intricacy and beauty that begins in France and ends in Spain, where the birds are netted out of the sky like fish. That's a Basque invention. So is whaling. Yes, the fantastic notion that the world's biggest creature could be hunted and harpooned from an open boat was actually dreamed up by the Basque sailors on this coast. Let's not forget the beret either. Every Basque invents the beret all over again when he puts it on. There seems to be no end to the angles, no limit to the variations of individual tilt. Well, we brought our cameras up to this little Basque village high in the mountains where only Basque is spoken. Who should we run into but our friend here, who's just as much an American as a Basque. How many years did you live in America?
23 years.
23 years. What part of the United States?
Colorado. Montrose, Colorado.
Montrose, Colorado. You liked it there?
Yes.
You speak very good English. And now you speak Basque and French too? What else?
I used to speak better when I was over there. I'm forgetting now.
You're forgetting. How long have you been here?
15 months.
15 months. You think you'd go back again?
Yeah, I believe someday.
Right.
I hope.
Well, there's of course an explanation for your speaking such good American. People don't realize, I think, that the Basques, who are great sheep herders, and you began as a sheep herder, is that right? are in great demand all over the world, and in many countries there's special quotas for Basques, particularly in America. Now tell us, what do you miss over here that you had over there?
I wasn't missing anything, but just in this country, that's all.
And tell me, when you're here, what do you miss from Colorado?
I miss everything I had over there.
Good. When you went to America, you began as a sheep herder, is that right?
Yes.
And most of the people do who come from this country, is that right?
Yes.
They're sheep herders. They know a lot about it here.
That's about all they do.
Yes.
Over the first few years, anyway.
And afterwards, what did you do?
Well, some of them just changed their job. First few years, they herd sheep.
And you, what did you do?
I herd sheep all the time.
And then afterwards?
Afterwards, I run some of my own.
You run some of your own?
Yes.
But you stayed in America and got into other lines of work, didn't you? Didn't you tell me you were a truck driver?
Well, I had the truck. I had my own, too.
Oh, your own truck? After, yes.
Yes.
So you used to get into town a good deal. So doing something for television like this isn't new to you. You've seen television.
Oh, yeah, I saw more than once.
What did you see in television?
Oh, I saw a lot of different things.
What did you like?
Oh, I like stock shows best.
Yeah.
Then I don't care much about the rest.
No, I can understand that. And why did you come back here?
I came back to see my folks, and I like it so much.
Yeah.
My hometown, so...
What? Why'd you come back?
See my folks, and then I liked my hometown so much, so I stopped here, and I stay here about a year now. No, 15 months here.
Are you glad you came back?
Yes.
Well, it's nice country here, too, isn't it? Oh, it's beautiful country. Now, why have you been staying here this long?
Because I got married.
You got married?
I did.
You did? To a girl here?
Yes.
Well, we'd love to meet her, could we? Is she around here somewhere?
She's here.
Would you ask her to come here?
Sorry, not right. This is my wife.
I'm very glad to meet you. Enchanté. Vous parlez français?
Oui, monsieur.
Oui. Et basque aussi?
Can you speak Basque?
I wish I could speak Basque. It's very difficult for us to learn it.
It is.
Did you just meet her now when you came back?
No,
Your
I
wife?
know her before.
You knew her before?
Yes, I did.
You mean all those years before you came?
But I was here 2 years ago, so I know her and went back and came back 2 months ago.
Maybe that's why you came back, is it?
Yes, I did. Part of it. That's part of it, is it? Part of it.
What? Are you going to bring her to America if you go back again?
Someday.
Yeah? Ask her if she'd like to come to America. What?
He says yes.
She says yes?
Terantu.
That's yes in Basque?
That's it.
Is that what it means? All right, and tell me this. Of all the girls you met in America, it's funny, you lived all those years and never got married in America.
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't have intention to get married then.
Yeah?
When I saw her, well,
Yeah, it changed everything.
Then I got ambitious.
You got ambitious. Would she like to go to America because she'd like to be with you or because she's curious to see what it's like?
Oh, she'd like to see the country.
Yeah, sure. But then you'll come back here and stay, won't you? Is she from the village here, from the town?
Yeah, right at this house.
This house, right next to us? This house. Oh, it's very nice.
That's where we live.
Good for you, and so nice. Enchanté.
Before another year, I'll be back probably over there.
Good. You will?
I think so.
You'll be in Colorado?
I'll be back in Colorado for another year.
Well, good enough. Well,
I might meet you over there.
good enough. Here we are in the Württemberger's garden, and this is Chris Württemberger, and here's his mother, Lael, who, under the name of Lael Tucker, wrote Lament for Four Virgins, that great bestseller. What are you laughing about? That's your mother's book. And Festival, wasn't that the last, Lael?
That was the last
That's
one.
right. Well, Chris,
Yeah.
you're practically a Basque, aren't you?
Well, nearly.
Nearly. How long have you been here in the Basque country?
7 years.
7 years. But you have been to school in America, haven't you,
Yes.
for a while, so you can tell the difference between a Basque school and
Yeah.
an American one. Which do you prefer? Going to school in France or in
In
back
America.
home? Why, because you learn more?
No, it's easier.
Yes, well, we do think, don't you agree, Lael, that there is a theory that education and indeed childhood should be associated with fun in America, which isn't shared in Europe.
Here, frankly, I think they get a better education. Orson.
In this tiny village?
In this tiny village, they get the standard...
Better than... Now, Chris went to school, didn't he, a couple of years ago, or for a couple of years, in America?
He went to school for 2 years in America, and he loved it, but I'm afraid the reason he loved it particularly was because it was so much easier. When we came back here, he had to go back. And every child is required to meet certain standards before he goes on.
Which are much higher standards than ours at home.
Which are much higher in almost all fields.
In education.
In education.
Yes.
That wasn't why we chose it for them, though.
Not just to make them work hard.
Not just to make them work hard. That's what we found after we got here. But when we chose it for them, we were really looking for the villages of our own childhood.
Really, what is it you're gaining in this very far away little corner of the earth?
A village is a village, and it doesn't make any difference what language it speaks.
Well, of course it doesn't for a child.
Not for a child unless you tell them so.
Yes.
And here in Seabour, and probably places at home, but here in Seabour where we've been able to live and to work ourselves, children walk out of their houses in the morning, kings of their kingdom, free of the streets. They come home when they're hungry or when they fall down. They know everybody in town. They have that sense of independence. And the Basques are independent people, too.
Indeed they are.
Here in Seabour, the children are living without mechanical aids to amusement.
No, that's very important. Without mechanical aids to amusement. I think that I'm not going to make a speech against the machine age, but an aid to amusement, it seems to me to be at the center of a great part of the moral crisis that we're faced with all over the world now. I don't think we need aids to amusement. I think we have to amuse ourselves. And we are in trouble, bad trouble, I think, when all we have to do is turn a button and have somebody doing something for us on a screen or through a loudspeaker. And kids here don't have all of that.
No, they don't. The boys go out with a pellet in one pocket, a ball in one pocket, and a pocket of marbles.
Yes, but of course, I know our friends are going to say they have a ball in their pocket in America or in England, and they have some marbles if they like to play that. But they don't have the softening of life by machinery, which is a danger, certainly, back home.
Well, for one thing, no child here ever expects to go anywhere in a car. They expect to go on their own 2 feet. And it's right back to the days of my youth when a ride in a car is a treat.
That's right.
I still think we're going back, in a sense, to what we had and loved. I don't think we're looking for anything more than all the things we want, such as freedom, independence, discipline, good education, habits which will lead them into a good life, wherever you find it. I don't think it's a matter of countries.
No, of course it isn't. Of course it isn't. But when we begin to speak about the differences of living in different places, we do tend to seem to be criticizing our various countries, our various ways of living. And if we appreciate the Basques, it doesn't depreciate what is often called the American way of life. I think if an English boy, for example, has a nice life for 2 or 3 years in Tuscany in Italy, he isn't betraying his English heritage.
And he won't lose the progress that we're making at home.
Yes, whatever that may be. In our home, it's technological. It's a constant movement toward easier living by means of the machine. But I don't think that progress and civilization go together particularly. I know that's a dangerous thing to say, but I happen to believe it. Dangerous, I mean that I'm likely to start an awful lot of discussion. I think that if you move forward, you are not likely to be very civilized in the process. And the most civilized countries are likely to be those where progress is not considered a very important preoccupation. And I think it's awful good for a kid, and awfully good for us, too, occasionally, to get away from those areas where moving somewhere and getting something done seems to be more important than living in a certain way and being a certain thing.
What we need are intervals, all of us, in backwaters.
I don't think everybody, we grown-ups or kids either, should be hustled through our lives without a chance to examine the things that our fathers and grandfathers knew and valued, and which have helped to make our civilization.
And keep them, and add them on to what we're getting.
That's it.
Well, in principle, I think all children should be at home for their adolescence, which is a period when you're trying to find out who you are. Childhood is another thing, and that's the time to get that something extra, that sense of growth. That's the time to pick up your second language as if it belonged to you.
The childhood
The childhood, when you can speak without those things that happen to your tongue and mouth that tangle you up so you never can be perfectly natural in another language.
And then there's, of course, the extra richness that comes from having lived in more than one part of the world and in contact with more than one point of view. And that's a defense for giving children some few years in places that aren't exactly homeland. Well, Lael, you've been a working journalist a long time. You've visited and lived in a lot of countries, haven't you?
Quite a few.
Quite a few. And yet you've picked, of all the countries that you've known, you've picked this little corner of France, the Basque country. Why did you make up your mind about that?
Well, it was right after the liberation in France. I came down, took one look, and fell in love with it.
I could understand that. I came down, took one look, and fell in love with it. But I think you're partly responsible, you and your family, because your feeling for this country is very contagious. I was only a few hours here, and I was beginning to feel very warmly indeed toward the Basques. And now I'm really very, very much an enthusiast. Not just to the country. It's a very beautiful country, of course, but it's the people that I think are so exceptional. I wonder why.
I don't know that I'd explain the Basques, which nobody can, but I think that quality of country comes from the people, because you get among these people, for one thing, just like the landscape, and perhaps that's why the landscape feels that way so much, you get a tremendous sense of tranquility. They're not worried about the future. They're
not worried about the future. They live for today.
It's not a question of living for today. They figure they've survived everything, will continue to survive. It's a kind of sense of dignity and of pride and of a business of being so close to each other that they have a sense of nothing being able to happen to them. They consider they've been occupied for I don't know how many hundreds of years now.
Well, they're really the Aboriginals, aren't they? They're the first, there's always been the talk about the mysterious Basque language. Where does it come from and all that? Because, of course, they do here in the Basque country and on the other side of the mountains. In the Spanish Basque country, they speak a language which has no roots in any known European language. Isn't that right?
There are one or two odd theories which one scholar will present and another one disagree with.
Yes.
But the only convincing theory about the Basque language I ever heard were two. One was that it was a language of the Garden of Eden. This was
really?
For a while. And the other was...
Maybe it is.
That it was the language of the devil. So you can have your choice.
We know that they've been here longer than anybody else in Europe.
Well, these people are proud of their past, and they're easy in the present, and they're not afraid of the future.
Well, that's a beautiful phrase and a wonderful formula, Lael, and I agree with two-thirds of it, if you forgive me. I think that they certainly aren't afraid of the future, and I envy them for that, because I think most of us are. And easy in the present is something very few civilized people are. And forgive me, I don't think the Basques are totally civilized in the pure sense of that word, because civilization does imply city culture by definition, and these people don't have a city culture. And I don't see how you can say, and here's where I begin my argument, how you can say that they're proud of their past, because although they have the longest one in Europe, it's only a past in the sense that they've been here, not in the sense that they've done a lot. And you can only be proud of your past if, well, I don't know, if you've built a pyramid or have a library full of books to show for your past. Dignity can mean, of course, a lot of things. It can imply a certain pomposity or rigidity of behavior, at least. Certainly there's nothing about the dignity of the Basque that's rigid, but formal, perhaps.
They're formal till they know you awfully well. I really think their dignity comes from self-possession.
A true self-possession.
A true self-possession. Yes. Every Basque owns himself. They give a piece to the world, very polite, very nice. They give a piece to this town.
And a piece to their family.
A lot to the family.
Family is a very important part.
Family's a tremendous thing.
Yes.
In the Basque country.
It's the big unit, isn't it? More important even than the town. And
Yes.
But of course, we're very near the Spanish border, and everybody knows that in Spain, the ladies, at least up until very recent moments in history, and even now to a good extent, are kept locked up at home a good deal.
Not the Basques. Try and lock up a Basque lady. They were grand. During the war, during the occupation, during all periods of trouble, the women were superb. Yeah. Mademoiselle Maggie.
Oh, I know her. She runs that little restaurant.
That lovely little old maid up
by the border. That's a little restaurant just by the Spanish border, and she's a marvelous old gal. And it's a pretty good restaurant, too.
It's a good restaurant. During the war, the Germans knew it was a good restaurant, too, and they came to eat. In the meantime,
in their great numbers.
In their great, lots of them.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, Mademoiselle Maggie was hiding aviators and refugees.
In great numbers.
In great numbers.
In the cellar.
Take them across, let them get across.
And entertaining the Germans up above. I remember I saw the guest book of this restaurant. It was filled with the names of German...
Herr Hauptmann,
and so on. They'd all been scratched out by the old lady on the day of liberation, wasn't it? With great fierce strokes of the pencil.
Took a pencil and...
Well, she was very brave about that, and the ladies are brave, but I'd like to speak a word now, if I may, in behalf of the bravery of the Basque men. Here's a friend of mine called Gabriel Lamarck. Notice the steel teeth. His real ones were knocked out by the Germans. Here's his son, Jean-Pierre. Nice boy. When Jean-Pierre was this age, that's his photo, the Germans made him prisoner. Kept him for days, torturing him, telling him his father was dead. They tried everything. What they wanted, of course, was names and facts. Little Jean-Pierre knew the facts and the names, but he didn't give up so much as an initial. Basques don't talk. Oh, by the way, Monsieur Lamarck would like his boy to spend a year in some English or American home. Maybe a boy of the same age could come and stay with the Lamarcks. They're nice people. Oh, I think it's wonderful, Leo, for a Basque father, particularly for a Basque father, because these are very conservative people, Basques, to want his child to have the experience of living in another country with other sorts of people. They have their own customs and costumes, of course, and their own music, their own dances. Most important of all, their own ball game, pelot. I think we'll keep our cameras mainly focused on that ball game. Pelot is the overall name. Yoko, Gabi, Grand, Chista, Rebo, Fronton. What we know is High-Line, are all variations. Everybody up here plays some form of it. All you really need is a ball and a wall. And a little Basque blood in your veins. Well, I haven't any of that. And I'm no pelot player, but I've grown so fond of this part of the world that I do feel somehow related to it. That orchestra you've been seeing and that you're still hearing, it's called the Estudiantina. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's a group of teenagers who get together in a little village in the Basque country and make that nice music. And the guitar player happens to be an American, an 11-year-old American friend of mine. We're going to meet him in a minute. There's a man who loved the Basque country more than I do. Really more because he lived here longer. I've never lived here. I'm just a visitor. I came down to visit him and his family. It was Charles Wertenbaker, the writer, great friend of mine, a great man. And he died just a little while ago, and I came down here to see his family. Of course, the first thing I did was to look up his 11-year-old son, Chris, whom you've seen playing the guitar. I went over to the school just after hours, and the kids came rushing down out of the school and streaming through the streets. And the first thing they did was go to the pelot court. Chris, come here. Hey, Chris. Hi. What are you doing? What are you playing?
Playing pelot.
Pelot? That's a far cry from baseball. American boy to be playing pelot. I don't even know the rules of the game. Are you a champion?
No.
You aren't? Well, who is? Introduce me to the champion.
Bernard.
Bernard, that's your best friend. Hello, Bernard. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Well, if you're the champion of this particular group, Bernard, you must have begun when you were quite young. Ask him.
I was 3 years old.
3 years old. Well, people of all ages play this game. Sheep herders and mountaineers, the smugglers, The fishermen, when they come in from their day's fishing, as soon as they've weighed in their catch, and they get right over to the pelot court and start a game. Yes, a Basque is practically born with a pelot ball in his hand. Fishermen just off their boats like these. Priests like this who've just finished saying Mass, and up in the mountains, shepherds, and most important for the local economy, smugglers. All divert themselves with some form of this vigorous game. It's supposed to be older than the Roman occupation. And there's a legend that the first game of all was played in the Garden of Eden, using the apple for a ball.
Yeah.
Well, there's one thing. Before Chris climbs out of the cherry tree, I'd like to ask him a question that a lot of people have asked me. Is there any money to be made out of this game? Do people make money out of it?
Well, the professionals are paid, I reckon, and they bet on each other.
Come on, give me a cherry. I'm hungry. That's right. Chris,
Yeah.
you're an honorary Basque. What does that make you as a pelot player? How's your game?
Oh, I'm not so good.
Well, you play pelot. What do you mean you're not so good?
Well, I've only been here 7 years.
7 years, and that doesn't make anybody a pelot player. What do you do? I guess you have to be born a Basque to be a real pelot player.
Yeah.
There's some 5-year-olds. They seem to be doing pretty well.
Oh, they start even before that.
They do?
Yeah.
There's a very good one there, so you can see him. He's a champion. What's his name?
Robert.
That's right, Robert. And who's the comedian in the group?
Oh, he's Jean-Louis, his best friend.
The kids, you'll notice, are hitting with clenched fists, bare hands. That's the name of the game, Manu. When they're older, they'll be playing with a ball that's very much harder. We've said that everybody in the land of the Basques is a pelot player, but of course that isn't exactly true. The female half of the population begins with hopscotch, which is an international game if ever there was one, and then graduates to the fandango. Gentlemen try to keep up. Remember little Robert, 5-year-old champion we saw working out against the church wall a few minutes ago? Well, we persuaded him to submit to a brief interview on some technical aspects of pelot. Bonjour, Robert.
Bonjour.
Introduce us to your friends, tes amis.
Lui Jean-Louis, puis lui Jean-Martin, et puis lui Didi, puis lui Jean-Bernard.
Qu'est-ce que c'est ça que tu as dans la main? I'm asking what he has in his hand.
Voilà.
And of course he explains that's the paddle. Tu aimais jouer?
Oui, monsieur.
Tu étais à l'école? I'm asking if he's been to school.
Oui, monsieur.
Qu'est-ce que c'est que tu as fait à l'école?
J'ai écrit.
I ask him what he's done in school, and he says he writes. Qu'est-ce que c'est que tu as écrit?
Feu.
I ask him what he writes, and he says F. Bon. Now I think we ought to have the champion give us a little demonstration. Montre-moi.
Comme ça.
Avec l'autre main. This is very important in the game, the changing of the hands. L'autre main.
Oui, monsieur.
Oh, merci, Robert. Bravo. Well, it's no wonder that so many great tennis champions are Basques, because, of course, pelot's the best training in the world for it. Barotra, for instance, who was born just around here, the great French champion. He was tennis champion more than 25 years ago, and then French champion just a couple of years ago again. Told me that he attributes a lot of his stamina, and particularly his footwork, to what he learned as a kid on pelot courts. And speaking of champions... I don't suppose there's any doubt that Robert's going to be a great champion. Pretty much depending on which town they come from, these future champions will be playing either with a big hand basket of Grand Chistra or with a smaller one, used in Yoki Gabi, and here it is. Chris's favorite game.
Yeah.
Yoki Gabi. Now, what does it mean, Yoki Gabi, Chris?
Well, Yoki Gabi means the game pure. They think it's a better game.
A purer game.
Yes.
Truer game. Maybe an older game. Do you figure an older game also?
I should think so.
Yeah. It's a lot faster, isn't it? Because that basket is shorter, yes. I understand the basket began as a fruit basket or a fish basket or something. Like one of the first great players tied to his hand. watching now is as important a part of Basque life as pelot. This is the fandango, famous fandango. And dancing it, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, is the champion pelot player that we saw playing Grand Chistra a little earlier. What's his name? Vishindarit. And with him is another pelot player?
No, it's the shoemaker.
Oh, he's the shoemaker and...
A couple of the girls.
And their girlfriends. Yeah. Who's making the music?
Well, there's the butcher, the baker, and the spark plug maker.
You're kidding.
No.
The three musicians, that seems to be their profession, butching and baking and candlestick. No, spark plug making.
Yeah.
Isn't that, the footwork is, of course, wonderful.
Yeah, sometimes they dance around a glass of wine.
Without spilling the wine?
Yeah.
And the old lady who's so light on her feet, the large lady, what's she do?
She's the peanut seller.
The local peanut vendor.
Yeah.
Of course, it's Sunday today, and we can see the people coming down from church, passing the pelot court. It's a funny thing about church, isn't it, Chris? They men and women in the Basque country sit separately in church.
Yes,
right?
The men are in the galleries upstairs, and the women are downstairs.
And it's funny because the only church I know of where they separate the sexes is the Jewish church. Just the opposite there.
Yeah.
This is a popular version of pelot up here in the mountains. It's manu, bare hand. Well, this priest was quite famous a little while ago, and he smuggled the Finley children over into hiding in Spain. The kids had been refugees, and some relatives had turned up and wanted them back, but the kids wanted to stay with their adopted family, and Father Ibarbaru carried the smallest on his back, using the regular smuggler's route over the mountains. And when he returned that day as a cover, he played a game of pelot. Quite a man. Well, he lost the game. The kids are in Israel. No matter what your opinion may be on the matter, it's sure that the good father was doing what he thought was right. And he certainly plays a good game of pelot. I think we'll take one of our cameras over and give you a close-up of that hand. They say that the right hand of a Basque is twice the size of the left, and that there's an extra bone in it. I don't know whether that's true or not.
Well, that's a legend.
That's just a legend. Well, this country's full of legends, and many of them have to do with pelot and fabulous pelot players. Surprisingly enough, quite a few of them seem to be true. There's the great Cain, who played in bare feet and won a championship, even though the court had been covered by the opposition with a thick layer of carpet tacks. Now, there was a tough man. He had a fairly tough wife, too, and she made a lot of trouble for him. And one day, he came home late. I think it was 8 days late that he came home, and she did that thing that wives do sometimes. She clammed up. She didn't say a word, just lay in bed and stared. And he said, good evening, and she didn't answer. And he said, what's wrong with you? And she didn't answer. And he said, don't you feel well? And she didn't answer. And Père Cain went away and got the local priest and came back and proceeded to give her extreme unction. Which is a story that ought to make a lot of husbands happy. What we're watching now is Rebo. R-E-B-O-T. That's the oldest, am I right? And also the most certainly the most complicated to watch because of the different elements in it. There's a shistera, the basket tied to the hand, and also a glove. A couple of players have a leather glove, as you'll notice. What's the glove for, Chris?
Well, they act as human nets.
The glove ones?
Yes.
And what about that funny thing in the middle there that the server uses?
Well, that's called a butaari.
What?
That's called a butaari.
Well, I'm glad you told me.
And the
Anyway, what do? You bounce the ball off that.
And they send it to the wall.
Yeah. How's it scored?
Like tennis.
And what we're listening to, that wonderful sound, that continuous singing, is the scorekeeper. Sings the score. I never heard that in a tennis game. Wonderful noise, I think. I think it'd improve a tennis game if people sang the score, don't you? There's another yarn about this Pecain I like. He was supposed to be playing a championship match against a team of Spanish Basques across the border, but he took sick. He'd come down with typhus. He told the doctors he'd have to play, but the trouble was he was dying. He asked them, any news of the game? And they said no. And he said, pity, I would have liked to have known how it came out. Then breathed his last and died. Chris, could you tell us the name of that song you're playing? It's a famous Basque song. I know, we've been hearing it before. Could you give us the words?
Those
are the Basque words. Would you translate them for us?
Children, you must learn Basque to speak, to play polite, and to dance properly.
Children, you must learn Basque to speak, to dance properly, to play polite. You know, I remember Chris's father saying to me a few months before he died that he'd always be grateful for the years he'd spent in the Basque country, but that he always regretted not having come here sooner, not having spent part of his childhood here so that he could do the things in the Basque song. Speak Basque and dance the fandango, play pelote. Well, Chris seems to be doing very nicely. Well, here we are back where we started, up on the border. You know, it's not only the Basques. Nobody really likes an international border. The nations it divides always want to push the border back a bit in their favor, and I rather think the people it divides would just as soon do away with it altogether. Well, Pentecost is one day of the year when that actually happens. And here it is, happening. Yes, the fences and frontiers are really down, and people are free for this one day to move without passports, carrying what they want in any direction that pleases them. It's like a big party. I can't think of a better reason for celebrating. Every good celebration, of course, ends with fireworks. And here in the Basque country, of course, they have a special kind of fireworks. Everything's special here. This great thing you see is called a toro de fuego, a bull of fire. And it's shaped like a bull with all kinds of fireworks sticking out of it, and men are inside, and they're running through the streets with it, with the fireworks shooting out in every direction into the people's faces. But for some reason, miraculously enough, I don't know why, nobody ever seems to get hurt. Well, it's time to close, and I think I'd like to end this time with a Basque ending, where they end every story, every Basque story. And I warn you, it's a little tough. It's not a bit sentimental. It's very much on the realistic side, and therefore very Basque indeed. At the end of a story, a Basque story, they don't say, and they lived happily ever after. Now here in the Basque country they say, and if they lived well, they died well.